I stood in my childhood home's decorated living room at Grandpa Harold's 90th birthday party. My mom, Linda, and sister Jenna were hosting. The house was filled with about 40 guests, balloons everywhere, and a beautiful catered spread covering the dining table. My husband Derek suddenly gripped my elbow, his face completely pale. He leaned close and whispered urgently into my ear. "Get your bag. We're leaving. Act like nothing's wrong." I thought he was overreacting to something trivial, maybe family drama. But when we reached his truck and he locked all the doors, his hands visibly shaking, he turned to me and said, "Something's very, very wrong here." 10 minutes later, I was calling the police. My heart pounded as I stared at Derek in the locked truck, parked 2 blocks away from my parents' house. Some were from banks, credit card companies, the Social Security Administration. There were multiple checkbooks with his name, but different account numbers. I felt my stomach drop slightly, but I pushed back. Maybe Mom's just helping him organize his finances. She takes care of him, Derek. This is probably nothing. Derek shook his head and showed me his phone screen. I took pictures because I recognized this pattern, Marilyn. This is what I see at work every single day. I'm a fraud investigator, remember? This looks exactly like financial exploitation or identity theft. The photos on his phone showed exactly what Head described. Envelopes scattered across a floral bedspread, statements from banks I didn't recognize, applications for credit cards still in their packaging. My hands went cold, but what really disturbed me, Derek continued, his voice dropping lower, were the sticky notes. They had your mom's handwriting on them, attached to different documents. One of them said, "Transfer before the 15th, Jay will handle the rest." "Who's Jay?" "Marilyn." "Jenna," I whispered, my sister's name feeling strange in my mouth. "That's Jenna. But this doesn't make sense. Mom would never hurt Grandpa. She's been taking care of him since Grandma died 3 years ago. She gave up so much to have him move in with them." Derek zoomed in on another photo. "Look at this. There are at least 7 different credit cards here in your grandpa's name. And these bank statements show large withdrawals, almost weekly. Some of them are for thousands of dollars." I grabbed the phone from his hand, staring at the images. The evidence was right there, undeniable. But my brain refused to process it. These were the people who raised me. My mom taught me right from wrong. My sister and I shared secrets our entire lives. They couldn't be criminals. "There has to be an explanation," I said weakly. "Maybe Grandpa asked them to help him. Maybe his consolidating accounts or something." "Marilyn," Derek said gently, taking my hand. "Look at this statement. It shows a withdrawal of $15,000 3 weeks ago. Does your grandpa even have access to that kind of money anymore?" I thought about it. Grandpa had always been careful with money, a child of the Depression who saved everything. When Grandma died and he sold their house to move in with my parents, I knew Head had a decent amount in savings, but $15,000 in one withdrawal seemed excessive. Then something clicked in my memory, something I'd dismissed earlier that day. "Oh God," I breathed. When I got to the party this afternoon, Grandpa pulled me aside. He seemed agitated. He whispered to me, "I don't understand where all my money is going. I tried to buy new shoes last week and my card was declined. Linda says it's just bank errors, but something doesn't feel right." Derek squeezed my hand. "What did you say to him?" I brushed it off. I admitted, shame flooding through me. I thought he was just confused. Mom had mentioned he's been having memory problems lately, forgetting conversations, repeating himself. I assumed it was normal aging and he was getting mixed up about his finances. Or, Derek said carefully, maybe your mom wanted everyone to think he was having memory problems. The implication hung in the air between us. I felt physically sick. My own mother. My own sister. But I needed more proof. I needed to be absolutely certain before I destroyed my family. "I need to call Aunt Patricia," I said suddenly. "She's Grandpa's sister. She lives 3 hours away, but she's always been sharp as a tack. If something's really wrong, she might know." I dialed her number with shaking fingers. She answered on the second ring. "Marilyn, honey, how's the party? I'm so sorry I couldn't make it," Aunt Patricia said warmly. "Aunt Patricia, I need to ask you something important. Have you noticed anything strange with Grandpa lately? Anything about his finances or how Mom's been treating him?" There was a long pause. When Aunt Patricia spoke again, her voice was tight with worry. "I've been concerned about Harold for months, sweetheart, but your mother won't let me visit him alone anymore. Every time I try to come up, Linda suddenly has plans or says Harold is too tired for visitors. It's been very strange." My blood ran cold. "What do you mean?" Concerned. 2 weeks ago, Harold called me in tears. He was whispering like he was afraid someone would hear him. He said he thinks Linda is stealing from him, but he's terrified to confront her because he has nowhere else to live. He feels trapped, Marilyn. I tried to drive up there the next day to check on him, but Linda called me and told me not to come to the birthday party. She said they were keeping it small, just immediate family. I looked through the truck window toward my parents' house, where I could see people mingling on the front lawn. "There are 40 people at this party, Aunt Patricia. 40, she repeated, her voice rising. She told me it was just going to be you, Jenna, and your dad. That was it. That was the confirmation I needed. My mother had deliberately isolated Grandpa from the one person who might help him, and Shed lied about it. "Aunt Patricia, I need to go. I'm calling the police," I said. "Good," she replied firmly. "Call me after. I'm getting in my car right now. It'll be there in 3 hours." I hung up and looked at Derek. "You're right. We need to call the police." Derek held my hand as I dialed the non-emergency police line. My fingers were shaking so badly I almost dropped the phone twice. When the dispatcher answered, I tried to explain the situation as calmly as possible. "My name is Marilyn Cooper. My husband is a fraud investigator for First Regional Bank, and we've discovered what appears to be financial exploitation of my 90-year-old grandfather by my mother and sister. We have photographic evidence of multiple bank accounts, credit cards, and documents suggesting systematic theft." The dispatcher took me seriously, thank God. She asked several questions, took down our location, and said she was sending an officer who specialized in elder abuse cases. Within 20 minutes, a unmarked sedan pulled up next to Derek's truck. Officer Rachel Torres was in her mid-40s, with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She sat in the back seat of Derek's truck and listened carefully as we explained everything. Derek showed her the photos on his phone while I filled in the family context. "This is exactly what financial exploitation looks like," Officer Torres confirmed, scrolling through the images. "Family members are actually the most common perpetrators in these cases. They have access, trust, and opportunity. The question is whether your grandfather is aware and consenting to these transactions, or if he's being coerced or deceived. He told me today his card was declined when he tried to buy shoes." I said, "And he told his sister he thinks my mom is stealing from him, but he's afraid to confront her." Officer Torres nodded. "I need to speak with Mr. Harold directly, and I need to do it in a way that doesn't alert your mother and sister. Can you get me into that party? You could come in as my friend," I suggested. No one would question it. She agreed, and the three of us walked back toward my parents' house. My legs felt like jelly. I was about to potentially destroy my family, but I kept thinking about Grandpa's face when Head whispered to me about his card being declined. The confusion in his eyes. The fear. We entered through the front door, and the warmth and laughter of the party washed over us. My mom spotted us immediately and rushed over, her face bright with that familiar smile I'd known my whole life. "There you are, we were wondering where you disappeared to," Linda said, pulling me into a hug. She smelled like her favorite perfume, the same one she'd worn since I was a child. I hugged her back mechanically, my heart breaking. "Sorry, Mom. Derek wasn't feeling well, so we stepped outside for some air. This is my friend Rachel. I hope it's okay that I invited her." Linda's smile didn't waver. "Of course. Any friend of yours is welcome. There's plenty of food. Help yourself, Rachel." I watched my mother walk away, laughing with a group of neighbors, looking completely relaxed and happy. Could someone really be this good at hiding their crimes? Or was I making a terrible mistake? Derek touched my arm. "We need to get your grandpa alone." I found Grandpa sitting in the living room, surrounded by well-wishers but looking tired. When he saw me, his face lit up. "Marilyn, sweetheart, come sit with me. Grandpa, would you like to see the old photo albums? I know they're in the den. It's quieter there, away from all this noise. His eyes brightened. That sounds wonderful. These old ears can't take much more of this racket. I helped him up, and we made our way to the den with Officer Torres following at a discreet distance. Derek stood guard at the door. Once we were settled in the quiet room, I introduced Rachel properly. Grandpa, this is Officer Rachel Torres. She's here because I'm worried about you. Derek and I found some things today that concern us about your finances. Grandpa's face crumpled. For a moment I thought he might cry, but instead he seemed to deflate, like he'd been holding himself up through sheer will and could finally let go. You found out, he said simply. I was hoping someone would notice. I was praying someone would help me. Officer Torres sat down across from him. Mr. Harold, I need you to tell me everything. Take your time. And he did. The story that came out was worse than I'd imagined. For the past 18 months, my mother had been taking Grandpa to the bank 2 or 3 times a month. She told him they needed to withdraw cash for household expenses, for his medical bills, for property taxes. She convinced him to add her name to all his accounts in case of emergency, telling him it was standard practice for elderly parents living with their children. He'd signed documents he didn't fully understand. His monthly pension and Social Security checks totaled about $4,000 and were direct deposited into accounts he no longer had access to. Linda gave him a small weekly allowance, maybe $50 for personal expenses. He hadn't seen a bank statement in over a year. I had saved $230,000 over my lifetime, Grandpa said, his voice breaking. Your grandmother and I were careful. We saved every penny. When we sold our house 3 years ago, that money was supposed to last me the rest of my life. Maybe leave something for you girls. Now I have less than $8,000 across all my accounts. I checked the last time Linda took me to the bank. I looked at the balance when she wasn't watching. I couldn't breathe. $222,000. Gone. Why didn't you say something? I asked through tears. I was ashamed, Grandpa admitted. And I was afraid. Where would I go? This is Linda's house. I gave up my independence to move in here. I thought maybe I was being paranoid, that I was just old and didn't understand modern banking. Linda kept telling me everything was fine, that I was getting confused. Officer Torres leaned forward. Mr. Harold, I need to ask you something important. Is anyone else involved in this besides Linda? Grandpa looked down at his hands. Jenna. Your sister, Marilyn. She's been taking me to what she calls doctor's appointments, but we never go to the doctor. We drive to banks in other towns. She helps me fill out applications for credit cards. She tells me it's to build my credit score back up, that it got damaged somehow. I didn't understand why we had to drive so far or why she made me promise not to tell Linda. It all felt wrong, but I didn't know what to do. I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. Jenna, my sister who I talked to almost every day, who sent me funny memes and called me when she was stressed, who I'd trusted with everything. Jenna works as a medical office administrator. I told Officer Torres numbly. She knows how the system works. She'd know how to manipulate it, Grandpa continued, and this part was the worst. Last week, Linda told me they might need to put me in a nursing home. She said my care was becoming too expensive, that they couldn't afford to keep me here anymore. But I'm healthy. I can dress myself, cook, clean. I don't need much care at all. I realized then that they were going to take the last of my money and put me away somewhere. He looked at me with tears streaming down his weathered face. That's when I decided I had to tell someone. I couldn't let them do this anymore. I was going to tell you today at the party, but I lost my nerve. And then you came to me. It felt like a miracle. Officer Torres excused herself to make a phone call. When she returned, her expression was serious. I've called for backup and requested a detective. Mr. Harold, we're going to need you to give a formal statement, and we'll need to gather more evidence before we can make any arrests. But the most important thing right now is your safety. You cannot go home with Linda tonight. Do you have somewhere else you can stay? He can stay with us, I said immediately, looking at Derek. He nodded without hesitation. We have a spare room. It's small, but it's yours, Grandpa. For as long as you need it. Grandpa grabbed my hand and held it tight. Thank you, sweetheart. Thank you for believing me. Officer Torres stood up. We need to go back to the party and act normal while we wait for the detective. Can you do that, Mr. Harold? He straightened his shoulders and I saw a flash of the strong, proud man had been before all this happened. I can do whatever needs to be done. Walking back into that party was the hardest thing he'd ever done. Officer Torres had briefed us on exactly how to act. Normal, calm, unsuspicious. We needed to give the detectives time to arrive and prepare their approach. I plastered a smile on my face and rejoined the party. Derek stayed close to me, a steady presence. Grandpa returned to his chair in the living room, accepting birthday wishes and small talk like nothing had changed. But everything had changed. I looked at my family with completely new eyes. My mother Linda stood near the kitchen, showing off a diamond bracelet to a group of her friends. The stones caught the light, glittering expensively. "It's gorgeous. Linda, was it a gift?" one woman asked. My mother laughed, a sound I'd heard 1,000 times. "I bought it for myself, actually. A little reward for all the hard work I've been doing, taking care of Dad. I figured I deserved something nice." I felt rage bubble up in my chest but forced it down. That bracelet probably cost thousands of dollars. Grandpa's thousands of dollars. Across the room, my sister Jenna was showing vacation photos on her phone to a cluster of relatives. "We're going to Hawaii next month. 2 weeks in Maui. I can't wait. The resort looks incredible." Her husband Kyle stood next to her, looking slightly uncomfortable. I caught Derek watching him with interest. Derek leaned close and whispered, "I'm going to talk to Kyle. Something tells me he doesn't know what his wife has been up to." I watched as Derek casually joined Kyle near the refreshment table. They talked for a few minutes, and I saw Kyle's expression shift from friendly to confused. Derek returned to my side. "Kyle has no idea." He mentioned that Jenna's been surprisingly generous lately. She paid off his truck loan as a surprise last month, which confused him because Jenna usually complains about money. He thought maybe she got a raise at work. So even Jenna's own husband didn't know. This meant my mother and sister had been deliberately hiding their crimes from everyone, living double lives. The calculation of it made me feel sick. I noticed 2 people in plain clothes enter through the front door. They moved like law enforcement, scanning the room with professional assessment. Officer Torres caught my eye and gave a subtle nod. The detectives had arrived. Everything seemed to happen in slow motion after that. The detective spoke quietly with Officer Torres near the hallway. Grandpa sat in his chair, hands folded, looking more peaceful than I'd seen him all day. My mother laughed at someone's joke. My sister took another selfie, and then Grandpa stood up. The room didn't quiet immediately. People kept talking, laughing, eating. But Grandpa moved to the center of the living room and raised his hand. "Excuse me, everyone. May I have your attention, please?" Conversations tapered off. Faces turned toward him. My mother looked over with a bright smile, probably expecting a thank you speech. "I want to thank you all for coming to celebrate my 90th birthday," Grandpa began, his voice steady but loud enough to carry. "It means the world to me to see so many familiar faces." My mother beamed. Jenna raised her phone to record the moment. "But I need to tell you all something important," Grandpa continued. "Something I should have said months ago." Linda's smile faltered slightly. I saw her exchange a quick glance with Jenna. "My daughter Linda and my granddaughter Jenna have been stealing from me for over a year. They've taken almost everything I had. I'm afraid of them, and I need help." The silence that followed was deafening. You could have heard a pin drop. 40 people stood frozen, unsure if they'd heard correctly. Then the room erupted. My mother's face went white, then flushed deep red. She laughed, but it sounded forced and shrill. "Dad, what are you talking about?" "Everyone. I'm so sorry. Dad's been having some memory issues lately. He gets confused sometimes." Jenna rushed to Grandpa's side, putting her arm around his shoulders in what would have looked like a loving gesture if you didn't know better. "Grandpa, you're tired. You've had such a long day. Let's get you somewhere quiet where you can rest." But Grandpa stood firm, gently removing Jenna's arm. "I'm not confused. I'm not tired. I'm telling the truth." Guests began whispering to each other. Some started gathering their coats, clearly uncomfortable and wanting to leave. Others moved closer, drawn by the drama. This was the moment. The moment I had to choose a side publicly, in front of everyone. My whole family was watching. Neighbors who'd known me since childhood were watching. I could stay silent and let this play out, or I could stand with Grandpa. I stepped forward into the center of the room. Grandpa is telling the truth, I said, my voice clearer and stronger than I expected. The police are here because there's evidence. Real evidence of financial exploitation. My mother's head whipped toward me, and the look on her face was something I'd never seen before. Pure venom. All pretense of maternal warmth evaporated. You, she hissed. You ungrateful, manipulative little liar. After everything I've done for you, after everything I've sacrificed, Mom. I started, but she cut me off. You've always been jealous of Jenna. Always trying to cause problems. And now you're trying to steal your grandfather's money by turning him against his own family. The accusation was so absurd, so completely backwards, that I almost laughed. But before I could respond, the two plainclothes detectives stepped forward and identified themselves. I'm Detective Morrison, and this is Detective Chen. We need to speak with Linda Cooper and Jenna Walsh. We have a warrant to search this premises. The room erupted in shocked whispers. My father Tom emerged from the garage where he'd been showing off his vintage car collection to some buddies. His face was completely bewildered. What's going on? Linda! What's happening? My mother ignored him. She was staring at the detectives with calculation in her eyes, already formulating her defense. But Jenna panicked. I saw it happen in real time. Her eyes went wide, her breathing quickened, and she grabbed her purse from the side table. I need some air, she said, heading toward the back door. Officer Torres moved to block her path. Mom, I need you to stay here. You can't keep me here. I haven't done anything wrong. Jenna's voice was rising, becoming hysterical. Then you won't mind if I look in your purse, Officer Torres said calmly. You need a warrant for that. Jenna clutched the bag to her chest. Actually, if you consent to a search, I don't. But your refusal is noted, Torres replied. That's when Jenna made a run for it. She tried to push past Officer Torres, heading for the back door. Torres caught her arm, and Jenna's purse fell to the floor, contents spilling everywhere. Credit cards scattered across the hardwood. A checkbook. And Grandpa's wallet, worn brown leather with his initials embossed on the front. Detective Morrison picked up the wallet and opened it. Mr. Harold, is this yours? Grandpa nodded. I thought I'd lost it last week. I looked everywhere. The detective examined the credit cards on the floor. These are all in Harold Cooper's name. Miss Walsh, can you explain why you're carrying your grandfather's wallet and credit cards? Jenna burst into tears. Not the dignified tears of someone falsely accused, but the ugly, choking sobs of someone caught red-handed. It was Mom, she gasped out between sobs. Mom made me do it. She said we deserved it after everything we've done taking care of him. She said it was our inheritance anyway. We were just getting it early. I didn't want to, but she pushed, and I was weak, and I needed the money, and I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. My mother's face went from red to purple. Jenna, shut up! Don't say another word. But Jenna was in full confession mode now, probably hoping cooperation would help her. We've been doing this for over a year. Mom has his passwords, his PIN numbers, everything. She's the one who planned it all. I just helped sometimes. Please. I'll tell you everything. Just please don't arrest me in front of everyone. Detective Morrison looked at his partner, then at my mother. Linda Cooper, we need you to come to the station for questioning. Jenna Walsh, you too. The party guests were filing out now, some trying to be discreet, others openly staring. My father stood frozen in the doorway, looking like someone had hit him with a truck. My mother drew herself up with as much dignity as she could muster. I want my lawyer. I'm not saying anything without my lawyer present. That's your right. Detective Morrison agreed, but we're still executing this search warrant. Within minutes, investigators were photographing my parents' bedroom, bagging evidence, documenting everything. The birthday party had turned into a crime scene. I found my father sitting on the front porch steps, head in his hands. I sat down next to him. Dad, did you know about any of this? He looked up at me, and I saw genuine shock and pain in his eyes. I swear to you, Marilyn, I had no idea. Your mother handles all our finances. I just go to work, come home, work on my cars. I trusted her completely. I believed him. My father was a simple man in the best sense of the word. He fixed cars, watched football, and loved his family. He wasn't complicated enough to be part of a scheme like this. I'm filing for divorce, he said quietly. I can't be married to someone who would do this. To her own father. I put my arm around his shoulders and we sat there together, watching our family fall apart. The house finally emptied of guests and investigators around midnight. Derek had taken Grandpa back to our apartment to get him settled. I stayed behind with my father, both of us in a state of shock. My mother and Jenna had been taken to the police station for questioning. The house felt eerily quiet after all the chaos. I should go down there, I told Dad. To give my statement. He nodded. I'll stay here and clean up this mess. All of it. At the police station, I found Derek waiting for me in the lobby. Grandpa settled in. He was exhausted but relieved. How are you holding up? I honestly don't know, I admitted. We were led to an interview room where Detective Morrison took our statements. Derek provided his professional assessment of the financial documents Head photographed. I recounted Grandpa's statements and everything Aunt Patricia had told me. Your mother has lawyered up and isn't talking, Morrison told us. But your sister is singing like a canary. She's been giving us a complete account of everything. He showed us the preliminary findings. It was worse than Wed thought. Over 18 months, my mother and Jenna had systematically stolen approximately $220,000 from Grandpa. Linda had taken the majority, using it to remodel her kitchen, $40,000, buy a new luxury SUV, $35,000, pay off substantial credit card debt, $28,000, and fund multiple vacations to places like Cancun, Las Vegas, and New York. Shed also developed an online gambling habit that had eaten up tens of thousands more. The investigators had already found evidence of this on her computer. Jenna had received roughly $60,000. Shed used it to pay off her husband Kyle's truck loan, buy designer handbags and clothes, and book the Hawaii vacation. The rest had gone to regular spending, living beyond her means while pretending she was still on a medical administrator's salary. How did they do it? I asked. How did they access that much money without anyone noticing? Detective Morrison pulled up a file on his laptop. Your mother had your grandfather sign power of attorney documents about 2 years ago, shortly after his wife died. He was grieving and trusted her completely. She told him it was just for emergencies, but it gave her complete access to all his accounts. She started slow, the detective continued. Small withdrawals that could be explained as legitimate expenses, but over time she got bolder. She opened new credit cards in his name using his excellent credit score. She took cash advances. She transferred money between accounts to hide the trail. Your sister helped by taking him to different banks in different towns so the fraud wouldn't be noticed in one place. Derek shook his head in disbelief. This wasn't opportunistic. This was planned and executed systematically. Exactly. Morrison agreed. We're also investigating another potential victim. A neighbor came forward after hearing about the case. Linda had apparently been helping an elderly woman on her street with bill paying and may have stolen from her as well. I felt like I might throw up. Who? Dorothy Walsh lives 3 doors down from your parents. Ring a bell. I remembered Mrs. Walsh. A sweet woman in her 80s who'd lost her husband a few years back. My mother had mentioned helping her out occasionally, and Id thought it was kind. How much did she steal from Mrs. Walsh? We're still determining that, but initial estimates are around $15,000, so it wasn't just family. My mother had been preying on vulnerable elderly people as a pattern of behavior. She was a genuine predator. Detective Morrison closed his laptop. I want you to know, Miss Cooper, that your grandfather's courage in speaking up and your willingness to believe him and take action probably saved him from losing everything. If this had gone on much longer, he'd have been destitute. What happens now? I asked. Well, continue gathering evidence. Your mother and sister will be formally charged within the next few days. Given the amounts involved and the vulnerable victim, these are serious felony charges. They're looking at significant prison time if convicted. I drove home in a daze. Derek was quiet beside me, giving me space to process. When we got back to our apartment, I found Grandpa sitting at our small kitchen table, drinking tea. He looked up when we entered. How did it go? I sat down across from him and told him everything. The full scope of the theft, the gambling, Mrs. Walsh, all of it. Grandpa listened with his jaw clenched. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. I feel so foolish, he finally said. I let this happen. I was weak and afraid. No, I said firmly. You were trusting. You believed in your daughter because that's what parents do. She betrayed that trust. That's on her, not you. Your grandmother would be heartbroken. Grandpa said, tears in his eyes. We raised Linda to be better than this. Where did we go wrong? You didn't go wrong, Derek said gently. Sometimes people make bad choices that have nothing to do with how they were raised. Linda made her choices. She's responsible for them. Over the next few weeks, the investigation continued. I went through the motions of my regular life, going to work, coming home, taking care of Grandpa. But everything felt surreal. My phone rang constantly. Relatives wanting the gossip, friends from childhood asking if the rumors were true. I stopped answering calls from numbers I didn't recognize. The extended family split into factions. Some relatives believed Linda's claims that she was being unfairly persecuted and that Grandpa was confused. Others were appalled and cut ties with her completely. Family gatherings became impossible to navigate. I found myself cut off from aunts, uncles, and cousins I'd known my whole life. It hurt, but it was also clarifying. I saw who people really were, who was willing to stand up for what was right, and who was more comfortable with comfortable lies. Jenna accepted a plea deal. In exchange for testifying against our mother and making full restitution for her portion of the theft, she would receive probation and community service instead of prison time. Her lawyer argued that she'd been manipulated by Linda and showed genuine remorse. I didn't know if that was true or just a legal strategy. Either way, I had no interest in speaking to her. My father filed for divorce. He was devastated but resolute. He told me that the woman he married wouldn't have done this, and he didn't know who Linda really was anymore. 3 months after Grandpa's birthday party, we got a major break in the case. While investigating Linda's computer, forensic accountants found detailed records she'd kept of every transaction. She'd documented everything in a spreadsheet, probably to keep track of how much she'd taken. But she'd also kept a journal. A physical, handwritten journal that investigators found in a locked drawer in her home office. They gave me a copy. I made myself read it. The entries were chilling. They showed calculation, planning, and worst of all, enjoyment. Linda had written about how easy it was to fool Grandpa, how his age made him the perfect mark. She described her gambling wins and losses. She talked about what she'd buy next. One entry from a week before the birthday party read, "Tomorrow's party will be the perfect distraction. H suspects nothing. After this, well, have enough to convince him to sign over the house deed. Then we can really cash out." She'd been planning to take even more. The house deed. The party wasn't a celebration of Grandpa's life. It was a cover for the final stage of the con. I gave the journal to the prosecutors. It became a key piece of evidence. 3 months into Grandpa living with us, Derek and I had settled into a new rhythm. We'd converted our small home office into a bedroom for Grandpa. It wasn't spacious, but it was comfortable and private. He insisted on contributing what little money he had left toward household expenses, and we'd reached a compromise where he paid for groceries each week. The adjustment period had challenges. Our apartment wasn't large, and we all had to learn to navigate shared space. But there were unexpected joys, too. Grandpa made breakfast every morning, fluffy pancakes and crispy bacon. He insisted on doing his own laundry and helped with dishes. He was fiercely independent, determined not to be a burden. More importantly, I was getting to know him in ways I never had before. Growing up, Grandpa had always been kind but somewhat distant, part of the landscape of family gatherings but not someone I talked to deeply. Now, living together, I heard his stories. About growing up during the Depression, about meeting Grandma at a USO dance during the war, about the dreams they'd had and the life they'd built together. His so-called memory problems had vanished almost completely. I realized my mother had probably been giving him unnecessary medications to keep him compliant and confused. His actual doctor, when we finally got him a proper checkup, confirmed that Grandpa was mentally sharp for 90. No dementia, No significant cognitive decline. Just a healthy old man who'd been systematically drugged and manipulated. The legal battle intensified. Linda had hired an expensive criminal defense attorney using money she claimed was from her own savings, though I suspected she'd hidden more of Grandpa's money than we'd found yet. Her attorney's strategy was to paint her as a devoted daughter who'd made some poor financial decisions but never intended to harm anyone. They tried to argue that Grandpa had been suffering from dementia and had given her permission to access his accounts. When that didn't work, they pivoted to claiming Head promised her the money as compensation for caregiving. Jenna, true to her plea agreement, testified against Linda. In a formal deposition, she described in detail how Linda had approached her 18 months prior with an opportunity. Linda had discovered Grandpa's substantial savings and felt entitled to them. She'd convinced Jenna they could borrow some money temporarily and pay it back before anyone noticed. But like all lies, it had snowballed. The first withdrawal led to a second, then a third. Linda got bolder, greedier. She researched elder financial abuse online and found forums where other criminals discussed tactics. She learned how to cover her tracks, how to manipulate a victim, how to exploit the system. The deposition transcripts made me physically ill. Jenna described taking Grandpa to banks in towns 30 or 40 miles away, helping him fill out credit card applications, coaching him on what to say. She described how guilty she felt, but how the money made it easier to ignore that guilt. I was working with a forensic accountant and an elder law attorney to try to recover Grandpa's money. It was a slow, frustrating process. We'd successfully frozen Linda's bank accounts and seized her new SUV. The court placed a lien on my parents' house for the kitchen remodeling costs. But money spent on vacations, daily expenses, and gambling was largely unrecoverable. We managed to get back about $140,000 of the $220,000 stolen, but it was a long shot that we'd recover more. Still, $140,000 meant Grandpa was financially stable again. He could afford his own place if he wanted one, though he told us repeatedly he was happy where he was. "I like living with you too," he said one evening over dinner. "I feel like part of a real family again." During this time, something wonderful happened. I'd been feeling off for a few weeks, tired, queasy, emotional. I attributed it to stress from the legal proceedings. But when my period was 2 weeks late, I took a pregnancy test. Positive. Derek and I had been trying to conceive for over a year with no success. We'd started to wonder if it would ever happen, and now, in the midst of this chaos, I was pregnant. When I told Grandpa, he cried. Happy tears, streaming down his weathered face. "I get to meet my great-grandchild," he said, his voice breaking. "Your mother tried to take so much from me, but she couldn't take this. I'm going to be here to watch this baby grow up." The pregnancy gave me new purpose. I became passionate about elder abuse prevention. I couldn't change what happened to Grandpa, but maybe I could help other families recognize the warning signs. I started volunteering with a local nonprofit that supported elder abuse victims. I shared Grandpa's story at community centers and senior facilities. I talked about the signs: isolation from other family members, sudden financial changes, a caregiver who's overly controlling, unexplained withdrawals or new accounts. The response was overwhelming. So many people had similar stories or suspicions about their own families. Elder financial abuse was far more common than I'd ever realized, affecting an estimated 5 million seniors every year in the United States, with losses totaling nearly $3 billion annually. Grandpa came with me to some of these speaking events. He told his story in his own words, describing how the manipulations started small and grew, how the shame and fear kept him silent, how he finally found the courage to speak up. "If my story helps even one person," he'd say, "then maybe some good came from all this pain." The trial date was set for early spring. As it approached, Linda's attorney made one last attempt at a defense strategy that enraged me. They claimed Grandpa was being manipulated by me and Derek, that we were the ones actually after the inheritance, that we'd coached him to lie about Linda. They suggested his testimony couldn't be trusted because of his age. It was a cruel, desperate tactic, and it backfired spectacularly. At a pre-trial hearing, the prosecution presented Linda's own journal as evidence. They read entries aloud in court, including the one about the party being a distraction for getting the house deed signed over. The judge's expression grew increasingly severe as the entries were read. When Linda's attorney tried to claim the journal was fiction and she'd been writing a story, the prosecutor pointed out that every transaction detailed in the journal matched real bank records to the penny. "This isn't creative writing, Your Honor," the prosecutor said. "This is a confession." The courtroom buzzed with whispers. Linda sat stone-faced, but I could see the panic in her eyes. Her carefully constructed defense was crumbling. The judge addressed Linda directly. "Miss Cooper, I've reviewed the evidence in this case thoroughly. The journal entries alone show clear intent to defraud and exploit a vulnerable adult. I'm denying your motion to dismiss and setting a trial date. I suggest you and your attorney seriously consider a plea agreement." Linda refused. She was going to trial, convinced she could somehow win. Meanwhile, the investigation into Dorothy Walsh's case confirmed that Linda had stolen approximately $15,000 from the elderly neighbor. Mrs. Walsh had trusted Linda to help her pay bills online since Dorothy wasn't comfortable with computers. Linda had been transferring extra money to herself during these helping sessions. This established a pattern. It wasn't just a family matter anymore. Linda was a serial predator who targeted vulnerable elderly people. The prosecution added those charges to her case. As my pregnancy progressed and the trial date grew closer, I felt a strange sense of peace settling over me. Yes, my family was broken. Yes, it lost my mother and sister to their own greed and poor choices. But it gained something too. It gained real intimacy with Grandpa, hearing his stories and his wisdom. It strengthened my marriage. Derek and I had weathered this crisis together and come out stronger. I was bringing a new life into the world, a baby who would know their great-grandfather's love. And Id found my voice. Id learned to stand up for what was right, even when it meant standing against people I loved. That courage was something I'd carry forward into parenthood. The trial began on a cold morning in March. I'd taken the entire week off work to attend every session. Derek came with me when he could. Grandpa insisted on being there for it all. The courthouse was an imposing brick building downtown, with marble floors and dark wood paneling that absorbed sound and created an atmosphere of somber authority. We sat in the gallery behind the prosecution's table. Linda sat at the defense table in a conservative navy suit, her hair styled, her expression carefully neutral. She looked like a respectable middle-aged woman, not someone who'd systematically robbed her own father. Jenna was present too, seated in the witness section. She'd testify for the prosecution as part of her plea deal. She didn't look at me or Grandpa. The prosecutor, a sharp woman in her 40s named Sarah Hendricks, laid out the case methodically. She presented bank records showing the systematic withdrawals. She displayed credit card applications with forged signatures. She read excerpts from Linda's journal. This wasn't a desperate daughter trying to pay for her father's care, Hendricks told the jury in her opening statement. This was a calculated, predatory scheme to steal a life savings built over decades of hard work and careful saving. The defendant didn't steal out of need. She stole out of greed. The defense attorney, a slick man named Gregory Pierce, tried to paint Linda as a devoted caregiver, overwhelmed by the burden of caring for an elderly parent. Linda Cooper gave up her freedom to care for her father, Pierce argued. She opened her home to him. She managed his medications, his appointments, his daily needs. Yes, she made some financial mistakes. Yes, she should have kept better records. But criminal intent? Exploitation? Ladies and gentlemen, this is a family disagreement being blown out of proportion by other family members who want to control the money themselves. It was infuriating, but I forced myself to stay calm. The first witness was Grandpa himself. He walked to the stand with dignity, placed his hand on the Bible, and swore to tell the truth. As he sat down, I could see his hands trembling slightly, but his voice was strong. The prosecutor took him through his story gently but thoroughly. Grandpa described his life savings, the decision to move in with Linda after Grandma died, the trust he'd placed in his daughter. She told me she needed my help paying household expenses. Grandpa testified. She said my medical bills were expensive. I trusted her completely. She's my daughter. Why wouldn't I trust her? He described the withdrawals, the confusion when his card was declined, the fear when Linda threatened to put him in a nursing home. I felt trapped, he said quietly. I had nowhere else to go. I'd given up my independence, sold my house. I was completely dependent on her, and she knew it. She used that against me. The defense attorney's cross-examination was brutal. He suggested Grandpa's memory was faulty. He asked the same questions multiple times, trying to trip him up. He insinuated that Grandpa was being coached by me and Derek, but Grandpa held firm. When Pierce asked him to recall specific dates and amounts, Grandpa pulled out a small notebook he'd been keeping since he moved in with us. I started writing things down, Grandpa explained, because people kept telling me my memory was bad. So I documented everything I could remember. Dates, conversations, amounts. I wanted proof I wasn't crazy. He read from his notebook, providing details that matched the bank records exactly. The jury was clearly impressed. Here was a 90-year-old man who was sharper and more organized than most people half his age. When Grandpa stepped down from the stand, several jurors smiled at him sympathetically. One woman in the back row was wiping her eyes. The prosecution called a parade of witnesses over the next 2 days. Bank employees who'd processed the transactions. The forensic accountant who'd traced the money. Derek, who testified about finding the documents and recognizing the fraud pattern. Then Jenna took the stand. She looked terrible, thin, pale, with dark circles under her eyes. Her hands shook as she was sworn in. She corroborated everything. She described how Linda had approached her with the scheme, how it had escalated, how guilty she'd felt, but how the money had been too tempting to refuse. "My mother convinced me that we deserved it," Jenna said, her voice barely above a whisper. "She said we were sacrificing so much to care for Grandpa, and he was going to leave us the money anyway. She made it sound reasonable, like we were just getting our inheritance early." "Did you ever consider saying no?" the prosecutor asked. Jenna nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Every day. But I was weak. I was in debt. My marriage was struggling. The money seemed like a solution to all my problems. I knew it was wrong, but I did it anyway. I'll regret it for the rest of my life." During cross-examination, the defense attorney tried to make it seem like Jenna was lying to save herself. But her testimony was too detailed, too consistent with the physical evidence. The jury seemed to believe her. The prosecution also called Dorothy Walsh, the neighbor Linda had stolen from. Mrs. Walsh was frail but clear-minded. She described how Linda had offered to help her with online bill paying, how Shed trusted her neighbor, how Shed discovered money missing from her account. "I considered Linda a friend," Mrs. Walsh said sadly. "I invited her for tea. We talked about our grandchildren. I never imagined she was robbing me." This testimony established the pattern the prosecutor needed. Linda wasn't just a daughter who'd made a mistake. She was a predator who targeted vulnerable elderly people systematically. On the third day, Linda took the stand in her own defense. Her attorney had probably advised against it, but Linda was convinced she could charm the jury. She tried. She talked about the burden of caregiving, the stress, the lack of support from other family members. She painted herself as a martyr who'd sacrificed everything for her ungrateful father. "I gave up my social life, my hobbies, my peace of mind to take care of him," Linda said, her voice dripping with self-pity. "I was exhausted. I was burned out. Did I make some poor financial decisions? Yes. Did I fail to keep perfect records? Yes, but I never meant to hurt anyone." The prosecutor's cross-examination destroyed her. Sarah Hendricks methodically went through the journal entries, making Linda read them aloud to the jury. The cold, calculating words in Linda's own handwriting, describing Grandpa as easy to fool and planning to take the house deed. "Does this sound like someone who made an honest mistake?" Hendricks asked. "Or does this sound like someone who planned and executed a crime?" Linda tried to maintain her composure, but cracks appeared. When confronted with the entry about the birthday party being a perfect distraction, she claimed she didn't remember writing it. "You don't remember?" Hendricks asked skeptically. "This is your handwriting, isn't it?" "Yes, but..." "And these dates match the actual transactions, don't they?" "I suppose. And you researched elder financial exploitation online, didn't you?" "We found your search history." Linda's face flushed red. "I was just curious. I wanted to make sure I wasn't accidentally doing anything wrong." By researching how to steal from elderly parents, Hendricks raised an eyebrow. "That's an interesting way to avoid wrongdoing." The jury wasn't buying it. I could see it in their faces. The final blow came when Hendricks asked about the money itself. "Miss Cooper, where did all this money go? Your father's life savings of $230,000. Where is it?" Linda couldn't account for it. She stammered about household expenses and medical bills, but when Hendricks showed that Grandpa's actual medical expenses totaled less than $5,000 over the entire period, Linda had no response. "You spent it on yourself, didn't you?" Hendricks pressed. "New kitchen, new car, vacations, gambling. You stole your father's life savings to fund a lifestyle you couldn't otherwise afford. I deserved some compensation." Linda finally burst out. "Do you know what it's like to take care of an elderly parent? The constant demands? I earned that money." The courtroom went silent. Linda seemed to realize what Shed just admitted, but it was too late. "You earned it," Hendricks repeated slowly. "So you do admit you took the money intentionally?" Linda's attorney jumped up with an objection, but the damage was done. Linda had essentially confessed on the stand. The closing arguments were powerful. The prosecutor painted a clear picture of predatory elder abuse. The defense attorney tried to salvage what he could, but there wasn't much left to work with. The jury deliberated for 2 days. Those were the longest 2 days of my life. I was 7 months pregnant now, uncomfortable and anxious. Derek and Grandpa stayed close, all of us waiting. Finally, the call came. The jury had reached a verdict. We rushed back to the courthouse. The courtroom filled with spectators, journalists, family members from both sides of the divide. The jury foreman stood. "On the count of financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult, we find the defendant guilty. On the count of identity theft, we find the defendant guilty. On the count of fraud, we find the defendant guilty. On the count of forgery, we find the defendant guilty. Guilty on all counts." The courtroom erupted. Grandpa gripped my hand so tightly it hurt. Derek put his arm around both of us. I saw my father Tom in the back of the room, his face a mix of relief and grief. Linda sat frozen, her face pale. For just a moment, her mask slipped completely, and I saw raw fear. The sentencing hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks later. During that time, multiple people submitted impact statements to the court. Grandpa wrote about reclaiming his life and his independence. I wrote about the family trauma and the broader impact of elder abuse. Mrs. Walsh wrote about the violation of trust. Even Jenna submitted a statement, apologizing to Grandpa and me for her role in the crime. At the sentencing, the judge was stern and unsympathetic. "Miss Cooper, you committed a profound betrayal of the most vulnerable person in your life, your own father, who trusted you implicitly. You showed no remorse, only entitlement. You painted yourself as a victim when you were, in fact, a calculating predator. This court takes crimes against the elderly very seriously." The sentence: 8 years in prison, with restitution requirements for the full amount stolen. Linda would be 70 before she was released. As the bailiff led her away in handcuffs, Linda looked back at me one last time. Her expression was pure hatred. She mouthed something I couldn't quite make out, but it looked like, "This is your fault." I looked back at her calmly and said, loud enough for her to hear clearly, "No, this is yours." And I meant it. I felt no guilt, no doubt, only a profound sense of relief that justice had been served. 6 months after the trial, my life looked completely different from anything I could have imagined. I was holding my newborn daughter, Hope Patricia Cooper, in the hospital while Derek dozed in the chair beside my bed, and Grandpa sat in the visitor's chair, unable to stop smiling. "She's perfect," Grandpa whispered, looking at his great-granddaughter with wonder. "Absolutely perfect." Wed named her Hope for the future we were building, and Patricia after Grandpa's sister who'd supported us through everything. Aunt Patricia had driven up from 3 hours away and was currently in the cafeteria giving us some family time. Hope had arrived 2 weeks early, a healthy 7 pounds and 6 ounces, with a full head of dark hair and lungs that announced her displeasure at being evicted from the womb. I'd never been so exhausted or so happy in my entire life. "Your grandmother would have loved to meet her," Grandpa said, his voice thick with emotion. "She always wanted great-grandchildren. She would have been an amazing great-grandmother." I agreed. "But Hope has you, and that's pretty amazing too." Grandpa reached out and gently touched Hope's tiny hand. Her fingers immediately wrapped around his weathered finger in that instinctive newborn grip. Everything I went through was worth it to be here for this moment. Grandpa said. Your mother tried to take everything from me, my money, my dignity, my independence. But she couldn't take this. I'm here. I'm going to watch this little girl grow up. I'm going to tell her stories about her great-grandmother and about the family we come from. The good parts and the hard parts. All of it. Over the past 6 months, our lives had settled into a new normal. Grandpa continued to live with us, though Wed started looking at larger houses now that we had a baby. Had become an integral part of our family, helping with household tasks, cooking his famous Sunday breakfasts, and preparing for Hope's arrival with the excitement of a kid at Christmas. His health had flourished. Without the stress and the unnecessary medications Linda had been giving him, he was sharp, active, and engaged. Head joined a walking group at the senior center and had started volunteering at the local library's literacy program 2 days a week. He loved teaching adults to read and had a natural patience that made him excellent at it. The recovered money, $140,000 of the original $230,000, had been returned to his accounts. It was enough to ensure his financial security for the rest of his life. With his modest needs and careful habits, He'd be fine. But Grandpa had done something beautiful with part of that money. He'd set up a small fund with a local nonprofit that helped other elder abuse victims with legal fees and support services. $5,000 a year to help people who couldn't afford to fight back against their abusers. If my suffering can help even one person escape what I went through, Head said when he established the fund, then maybe there's purpose in the pain. I'd continued my advocacy work, even through pregnancy. I'd become a regular speaker at community centers and senior facilities, sharing our story and teaching people to recognize the warning signs of elder financial abuse. The response had been overwhelming. So many people had similar stories. Adult children taking control of parents' finances and gradually stealing everything. Caregivers isolating elderly victims from other family members. The patterns were sickeningly familiar. But our story also gave people hope. It showed that speaking up mattered, that fighting back was possible, that justice could be served. My relationship with my father, Tom, had slowly healed. Head finalized his divorce from Linda and had thrown himself into rebuilding his life. Head moved into a small apartment, kept working at his auto shop, and was learning to be alone after 40 years of marriage. I should have paid more attention. Head told me during one of our weekly coffee meetings, I trusted your mother with everything financial. I never looked at bank statements or asked questions. I was willfully blind. You trusted your wife, I'd said. That's not a character flaw. Maybe not, Head replied. But I still feel like I failed your grandfather. I lived in the same house and didn't see what was happening right under my nose. Tom had become a devoted grandfather to Hope. He visited several times a week, bringing tiny tools and already planning the day he could teach her about cars. His relationship with Grandpa had evolved into something resembling friendship, two men bonded by their shared experience of Linda's betrayal. Jenna had completed her probation and community service. Shed made full restitution for her portion of the theft, using money from a second mortgage on her house. Her marriage to Kyle had survived, barely, but required extensive counseling. Shed sent me a letter about 3 months after the trial. It was a real letter, handwritten, not an email or text. In it, she took full accountability for her actions. She didn't make excuses or ask for forgiveness. She simply acknowledged the harm Shed caused and expressed genuine remorse. I know I can never undo what I did, she wrote. I stole from Grandpa, I betrayed your trust, and I participated in something truly evil. I was weak and greedy, and I'll spend the rest of my life trying to be better. I don't expect you to forgive me or want a relationship with me. I just needed you to know that I understand what I did, and am sorry. I'd read the letter several times. I didn't feel anger anymore, just a kind of neutral sadness. The sister I'd thought I knew had never really existed. The real Jenna was someone who'd been capable of stealing from her own grandfather for designer handbags and vacation photos. I'd written back a brief response wishing her well, but making it clear we wouldn't have a relationship. I needed to protect my peace and my family. Maybe someday that would change, but not now. Probably not ever. Linda was in a women's correctional facility 2 hours away. Shed appealed her conviction, claiming ineffective counsel and procedural errors, but the appeals had been denied. Shed served the full 8 years unless she earned early release for good behavior, which seemed unlikely given reports that she'd been difficult and uncooperative with prison staff. She'd written to my father twice, letters full of self-pity and blame. Tom had sent them back unopened. She'd tried to write to me once, but I'd done the same. I had no interest in her version of events or her attempts at manipulation. On Hope's first birthday, I received one more letter from Linda. Against my better judgment, I opened it. It wasn't an apology. Linda maintained that she'd done nothing wrong, that she'd been a victim of a vindictive family and an unjust legal system. She insisted she'd appeal until she won, that she'd get her conviction overturned, that we'd all regret what we'd done to her. I read it once, felt a deep sense of pity for a woman so trapped in her own delusions, and threw it away. I didn't respond. Linda no longer had any power over my emotions. The life lesson had emerged gradually over these months of healing and rebuilding. I'd learned that family isn't just about blood, it's about love, respect, and choice. Grandpa had chosen to trust me with his story. Derek had chosen to support me through the hardest time of my life. Aunt Patricia had chosen to drive 3 hours every few weeks to visit and help. My father had chosen to believe the truth even when it destroyed his marriage. Those were the relationships that mattered. Those were the people who defined family. I'd also learned that protecting the vulnerable is worth any cost. When I'd stood up at that birthday party and told the truth, I'd known it would destroy relationships. I'd done it anyway because it was right. That courage, the willingness to do hard things because they're right, was something I wanted to pass on to Hope. My advocacy work had led to real change. Working with other activists and the local council member, we'd helped pass stronger county ordinances protecting vulnerable adults. Banks now had mandatory reporting requirements if they noticed suspicious activity in elderly customers' accounts. Senior centers offered free financial literacy classes teaching older adults to recognize exploitation. Adult protective services received additional funding and training. Grandpa's case had become a catalyst for systemic change. His willingness to speak up publicly, to share his story despite the shame and pain, had helped protect countless others. One Saturday morning in the fall, almost 2 years after that fateful birthday party, I sat on the porch of our new house watching Derek and Grandpa play with Hope in the yard. We'd bought a small 3-bedroom house with a fenced backyard, finally giving everyone proper space. The leaves were changing colors, painting the world in golds and reds. Hope, now a sturdy toddler with her father's eyes and my stubborn streak, squealed with delight as Grandpa lifted her onto his shoulders. "Be careful," I called out, though I wasn't really worried. Grandpa was steady and strong, and Hope was fearless. My phone buzzed with a text from Aunt Patricia, sending photos from her visit last week. I smiled, looking at the pictures of Hope covered in flour from a baking session, her great-great-aunt teaching her to make cookies. I thought about that moment 2 years ago in Derek's truck, when Head shown me the evidence and my world had shattered. I'd been terrified of losing my family. And I had lost them, the family I'd thought I had, built on comfortable illusions and willful blindness. But I'd gained something more authentic. I'd learned that speaking the truth, even when it destroys comfortable lies, is an act of love. I'd learned that protecting the vulnerable requires courage but brings its own rewards. I'd learned that justice sometimes demands breaking your own heart first, but healing is possible on the other side. "Mama," Hope called from the yard, waving at me with both hands. "Watch." Grandpa was teaching her to do a little dance, and she spun in a wobbly circle, her laughter ringing out like bells. I watched my chosen family, my husband, my daughter, my grandfather, this imperfect, beautiful constellation of people who'd survived trauma and come out stronger, and felt a profound sense of peace. Sometimes the hardest thing and the right thing are the same thing. Sometimes losing everything leads you to what matters most. I thought about everyone who might hear our story. Everyone who might be living with their own suspicions or fears about a loved one being exploited. I wanted them to know that speaking up is worth it, that justice is possible, that healing happens. So let me ask you something. Have you noticed changes in an elderly loved one's financial situation? Has someone isolated them from the rest of the family? Do they seem confused about money in ways that don't match their usual sharpness? These could be warning signs. Don't wait like I did. Don't brush off your concerns. Trust your instincts. Ask questions. Seek help. The conversation might be uncomfortable, but silence allows abuse to continue. If this story resonated with you, please share it. You never know who might need to hear it. Someone in your life might be facing a similar situation and feeling alone. Your share could be the nudge they need to take action. Subscribe to hear more stories like this, stories about real people facing real challenges and finding the courage to fight back. And leave a comment telling me your thoughts. Have you dealt with elder abuse in your family? What lessons have you learned? I read every comment, and your stories matter. And if you found value in Hope's story, our story, please hit that like button. It helps others find these important conversations. Thank you for listening to our journey. Thank you for caring about the vulnerable people in your lives. Thank you for being part of a community that believes in justice, truth, and the courage to stand up for what's right. I whispered to myself, watching my beautiful family in the golden afternoon light. Sometimes the hardest thing and the right thing are the same thing. And sometimes losing everything leads you to what matters most. Hope squealed with laughter as Grandpa spun her around one more time. Derek looked up and caught my eye, smiling with that same steady love that had carried us through the darkest days. This imperfect, hard-won, precious life, this is everything. May you find the courage to protect the people you love, the strength to speak difficult truths, and the peace that comes from knowing you did the right thing, no matter the cost. Take care of each other out there. And remember, family isn't just who you're born to. It's who shows up, who tells the truth, and who loves you enough to do hard things.